Hey everyone, welcome to Ethos Live. It's been a while. We want to learn to be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. And so today, if you're listening in a living room setting, or if you're just driving down the highway and you've got this YouTube playing on audio, we are so glad that you joined us today. And so today's topic, we're going to talk about justice and injustice. And of course, we always use the concepts of Jesus. For many of us, whatever our perspectives are of Jesus, whether they've shifted, changed, stay the same, most of us agree that Jesus is a really interesting figure who shares tons of beautiful wisdom, how to navigate the world. And so today I want to look at some of the teachings of Jesus about justice and mercy. And so it's going to be kind of a fun one. As always, please continue joining us, ethos-church.org. That's where we are. Find most of our stuff there. Or you can go to tonywerfel.com. Either way, thanks for joining us. So let's start. Today, I want to talk about justice because growing up, I had some interesting versions of justice. And so as I say the word justice, I wonder what comes to your mind. Justice. Let me even ask this. When have you observed, I want you to take a minute and maybe even just pause the slide for right now. When have you observed someone basically getting what you feel they deserved? Justice. They got justice served to them. So just for a minute, I want you to pause the YouTube channel and just consider for a minute, when have you seen someone get what you think they deserved? All right. So I was looking online and I found a bunch of interesting stories about people who got what they deserved. And so not that long ago, Hank Haney, he's a golf teaching professional. And so he was on this really interesting interview online, and he said some really defacing things about women and women's golf. And one of the things he said while he was there was, he said, no one really takes women's golf seriously anyway. He said he could only name just a couple golfers. And he even made some kind of racial comments on there as well. And so, of course, Haney got a bunch of backlash. And one of the people who responded about this interview was Tiger Woods, someone who some people might even say he got what he deserved, right? And so Woods says this. He said he deserved it. By the way, Haney, of course, was punished. He got punished for this, and he's been suspended. And so Woods says this of the suspension. He says he got what he deserved. He deserved it, Woods said of Haney's suspension from the radio show. Just look at life like that. And he obviously said what he meant, and he got what he deserved. Interesting coming from Tiger Woods, who many again have said Woods got what he deserved, right? Here's some other interesting pictures I saw online that I thought, oh yeah, that kind of sums up get what they deserve. Law enforcement. How many of us have gotten a ticket? We left the car and it was only 5 minutes and we got a ticket. And you just God, there's got to be some level of hell where these law enforcement people who just do tickets are going to go, right? And so again, the law enforcement police officer gets the ticket. It's brilliant. It's justice, right? Some of you are saying, that's justice. That's perfect. Here, I saw this meme and I thought, this is really funny. Guy told me to blank off when I asked him to move his truck. Now he's going to stay in the porta potty until he learns some manners and apologizes. Isn't that awesome? Unless, of course, you're the guy in the porta potty, right? Very funny picture, one of these viral ones on Twitter. Another one on Twitter I thought was kind of funny. My neighbor keeps vacuuming his floor when I'm sleeping at night. I started vacuuming the ceiling as he sleeps at 3 a.m. How many of us would want to do that to neighbors? Yeah, they get what they deserved. I feel like there would have been a better way to deal with that instead of lifting up the vacuum. Maybe it's a light one. Here's a funny meme or a funny GIF I saw that I thought, oh, that's really brilliant. I feel like I could watch this over and over again. The dude slams the leg right out from under him, and he's the one that takes the spill. Yeah, how many of you have been those guys? You're the one always doing practical jokes and things, and you get that done on you. Fantastic. Guess what he deserved. Let me keep going. This story I find really interesting. 72-year-old boxer. So a burglar broke into this house, threatened this individual with a knife, And this individual just beat the tar out of him because this burglar had no idea. He is in the home of a 72-year-old retired boxer. And the boxer obviously fared a lot better than the burglar. Got what they deserved. Here's one more GIF, I think. So funny, especially coming from California. We see terrible drivers all the time. Shoop, right up the shoulder. Yeah. I would love to see that sometimes of those people. Oh, as long as they're not hurt, of course. They get what they deserve. They get justice. And so growing up, I grew up with a picture of God, the divine, the mystery unfolding, however you want to describe God. I grew up with this picture that God was angry, right? I did all of these things. I continue doing all these things. Someone a long time ago did a bad thing, and now it's all on me, right? I'm bad, I'm evil, I'm wicked. All the songs say so, right? And so I grew up with this idea that this God was looking over me, wanting to punish me. And of course, this God was not lenient in this punishment. Some believe this God wants to burn you for eternity. Others, eschatology says, of course, that this God is going to just burn you for a little while, right? Either way, you're going to get punished. It's going to be severe. And it's because of your actions that you're going to be punished severely. And this God is just waiting to step down and punish severely. And so the idea of punishment, unfortunately, has been kind of grafted into the Jesus story. And I think this is one of the profoundly painful things that's happened. I think it's actually shifted the narrative so much that it's almost unrecognizable. Punishment. And so if you think about punishment, according to most conservative Christians, punishment was something that people got because they deserved it. And so when you looked at mercy, whenever someone showed an act of mercy, that was actually something that was an affront to punishment and justice. Mercy became an affront to justice. Because again, mercy is basically inactivity, right? In leniency. It's the parent. I remember so many times, again, having kids. Before I had kids, I was an expert. I used to always say, oh, that kid just needs to get the hell beat out of him, or whatever, just spanked, right? Because that's what happened to us. We got spanked all the time. But maybe not, right? Maybe that wasn't justice. Maybe that left some scars. Maybe that caused some distance between mom and dad. But we don't think about it until later. But back then, watching it unfold, I remember thinking, those parents just need to do something. They're not doing anything. They're being too lenient, too merciful, right? And so again, if your idea of justice is punishment, severe punishment, mercy, it becomes a bit of a problem. Mercy becomes a problem when justice revolves around punishment. And so mercy and justice, according to this punitive kind of way of thinking, they're in conflict, constantly in conflict. And that's where I go to the first century people. When you think about first century people, especially Jews, here are a bunch of people who have basically had their homes ripped from them. They've been under the control of empire after empire. And Rome comes in, Rome who values punishment, right? Values violence, strength, right? Strength is in how violent and how warring our empire is, how many territories we can conquer. Rome comes in. And because of Rome's influence, actually begins to shift how the Jews view God. Interesting, right? And so the Jews begin to look at their enemy, and they begin to hold on more and more to this idea that you will be punished severely. They begin to not hold on to the promises of tikkun olam, right? Where shalom, nothing missing, nothing broken happens. Where peace for the world happens. What they begin to hope for is that their enemies are severely defeated, murdered, destroyed, right? And so they're looking for their God to enact justice. And again, their form of justice for the majority of Jews during this first century was a justice that absolutely left their enemies broken, just dead, right? And this is why you see there were factions who would often use violence to try to be the solution. And so you would see this. This was the dominating narrative during Jesus' time. And so it's interesting when Jesus jumps on the scene, Matthew 5:44, Jesus has a different kind of view of justice. And it's so different that it actually is going to cause a lot of stir. It's almost un-American today, right? To say that we should love the terrorist, right? And so in Jesus' time, he's essentially saying, love the terrorist, right? Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, right? Like pray for those that persecute you. Are you serious? But that's the narrative that Jesus begins to shift. He inserts this into a really punitive kind of culture, violent, punitive culture. His narrative is different. His teachings are a little bit different. Yeah. Interesting moment. In Matthew 17:14-21, most people believe this was actually Jesus' bar mitzvah because he goes in front of the temple there and he actually begins to open up the Bible, the Torah. I shouldn't say Bible, the Torah. And he opens up those first 5 books of the Old Testament. And when you do this as a young person, you were supposed to read a section and then share a little bit about the section from maybe one of the teachings of one of the rabbis. And so Jesus opens up the book of Isaiah. And he begins quoting the book of Isaiah. And it makes these people who are watching, the members there, so angry, they try to throw him off a cliff. So what would make these people so angry they want to throw Jesus off a cliff? What does Isaiah say? Well, let me read it to you. He gets up front and he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he's anointed me to preach good news to the poor, has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he ends there, right? He makes them so mad by this. Why, right? Because for most of us reading this, we'd say, this sounds like good news. Like this is a good thing, right? Help the poor, free captives, blind people are able to see, oppressed are set free. That's really good news. The year of the Lord's favor, like who doesn't want that? But here's the thing. When you live in a place of needing to get the last word, to always stand above someone, to constantly be the last one to jab, when that's your worldview, when that's the way you live, then good news for anyone else but you, good news for your enemies, that's bad news for you. And so this is where it's interesting because Jesus here, he leaves out the next part of the verse that's in Isaiah. He purposely leaves it out. And everyone during this era, they are holding firm to that last piece that Jesus omits. They're holding firm to, as that's a promise to them. Here's what that last part said. It says, release them from the darkness of the prisoners to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And watch this. And the day of our God's vengeance, to comfort all who mourn. God's vengeance falls down our enemies. He leaves out the vengeful God element. He leaves it out. And it's so frustrating to them that they want to throw him off a cliff. Ever have a moment where like you have someone you're at odds with? So at odds with that when you hear their name brought up from any of your friends, you get a little frustrated. Because how dare them even like have coffee with the dude? Like that's your ex-girlfriend. How dare them be friends with them? You got to draw the line. You're my friend, right? This is how the Jews are feeling about the Romans. God, you cannot give them blessings. They're the enemy. And that Jesus says, no, God's favor falls on everybody. God's favor falls on the wicked and the righteous, right? Hard to handle. Hard to handle when you're one of these people who have been oppressed and ruled over by a tyrannical force like Rome. How dare God, how dare the divine give them any blessings? That's why they want to throw him off a cliff. And so Jesus, of course, when he talks about justice, he doesn't use punitive language. He doesn't use anger, wrath, those kind of things. You won't hear Jesus talking about, hey, someday I'm going to get mad enough, I'm going to burn y'all for eternity. And then some of you, I'm going to lift you back up, burn you again. That's not Jesus' justice. The idea that Jesus says is justice is found in acts of mercy. Justice is found in acts of mercy. And that's why when you look at Romans 21, Paul's talking about the cross. And many people will get this confused and they'll begin to say, oh, well, see, it's all about God needed death and he needed to murder Jesus. Well, no, that's original sin. That's Constantine. That's 300 AD. That's not the point of what Paul's saying. Paul's saying something really beautiful here. He says Jesus doesn't punish those basically who persecuted him, and neither should you. It's simple. Justice is found not when we carry our weapons and attempt to murder those who hurt us. Justice is where we say, you know what? It happened. It was painful. I don't have to escalate the situation anymore. I don't have to have the last word. I don't have to escalate this anymore. I'm going to let this violent act end there. I'm not going to continue it. That's why the most beautiful part of the cross for me, less and less about this idea of this exchange between God and Satan or God and mankind or whatever. The cross is a beautifully human moment where Jesus says, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. It's you basically saying, I'm going to stop the escalation of this thing by turning and wishing my enemy well. I'm going to wish that boss who was a terrible, miserable boss well. I'm going to wish the dirtbag of a husband who left me and this and this and this and doesn't give child care and child support. I'm going to pray for him. You do that, you take all the venom away, and you're left with peace, shalom, justice. So hard to hear, but so beautiful to try. And so consider this. There's two different ways of viewing justice. And I basically outlined it for you now. There's the criminal one, of course, that many have grew up with. We grew up with this over and over. We were told justice is equated with punishment. But Jesus' perspective shifts things. Jesus says, no, justice needs to be restorative. When there's an act of justice, it needs to be moving toward where people experience some kind of repair. And that's why justice is found not in punitive acts. Justice is found in repairing things, showing acts of mercy and compassion, even when we don't think people deserve it. That's justice according to Jesus. Interesting, right? The criminal model says mercy is equated with inaction and leniency. And I hear a lot of people say this. They'll say, well, what do you expect? Like if these people come from over, from some Islamic state and they come over and they try to do this and this and this to me. And of course, it's always like the most extreme thing, right? They always go to something really extreme. What do you expect me to do? Nothing? Just expect me to be a doormat? That's what they'll say to me. And I think, no, like justice is an action. It doesn't have to be a violent action though. Justice can be mercy in the action of making things right. It's the old grandmother who goes out every week and cleans up the graffiti that the gang members put on the wall, right? Justice is cleaning the streets. Justice is taking something that's been twisted and bending it back to straight. Justice is action, but it's action geared, pointed, directed toward restoration. That's justice. That's restorative. The criminal model also says mercy and justice, they're in conflict. You can't have a merciful God and a justice God, right? You can't have both. You got to choose, right? Whereas Jesus says, no, acts of mercy are the means in which justice is experienced. And every time you see justice, shalom, whenever you see that experienced, God was there. God was there. So it's almost as if when people ask the question, where is God? You could just simply say, well, where are acts of mercy and justice? Because he's right there. Right there. Usually it's the criminal model. You want to see acts of injustice? Look at the criminal model and you'll find acts of injustice there. Look for things that restore, you'll find God. You'll find the divine. And that's why, again, I love the word salvation. Again, it did not mean some golden ticket you get if you're really good. That was not the point. Salvation was a medical term. And the word salvation meant healing. It meant repair. And so in order for us to experience salvation, we don't gain it by destroying more things. We don't gain it by holding our arms, right? We don't gain it by going through and just demolishing our enemy. We experience healing here and there. We experience it here, forgiving self, learning how to cope with certain things. And then we experience it by finally learning to forgive and move forward. Those are ways we experience sotar, healing, salvation. Interesting, when I think about different ways, I always want to add some application pieces. This is very easy to say these things, but if we don't have ways in which to interact with them, challenges, then it's kind of all for nothing. And so one of my favorite writers, he says, ways in which we can learn to deal with conflict, pain, brokenness, instead of acting violently, making things worse, he says, let's learn to be solution-oriented. Let's in the middle of all of the conflict, let's remind ourselves there's always a solution to be had. Like, there's always a better way. And so rather than like turning with my fist, maybe I just, what's the other thing? What's the thing? How can this thing be reshaped? Stopping and asking that question 9 times out of 10 is going to de-escalate the situation. Another thing he says is learn to stay calm. Learn to stay calm. On average, again, people take 24,000 breaths per day, total of 3,000 gallons. Again, people are breathing a lot, but most people, you're supposed to breathe 12 to 14 breaths a minute. Most people are just, they're breathing like 100 times a minute because we don't know how to breathe. We don't know how to stay calm. It's interesting when you see that Facebook post, why is it that it immediately just sets you off? You become a different person. Maybe in the middle of it, practice learning to stay calm. Stop, breathe. Remember, this is not the end of the world. You not getting the last word on that stupid comment page, who freaking cares? That doesn't define you. You don't have to say anything back to the person. Let the troll be a troll. Let it go, right? Let it go, let it go. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. Another comment my favorite writer says is walk in their shoes. Walk in their shoes. When in conflict with someone, ask lots of questions. Ask lots of questions because the more answers they give you about who they are, where they're from, it's going to be a whole lot easier to show them compassion. Oh, you did this because this is happening. Oh, you're feeling really frustrated about this and this. No wonder you took it out on me today, right? And I can actually, while I don't agree with how you did it, I can have some compassion and empathy for you because I can understand your story. Next one is give them the benefit of the doubt. I have this often for me. I assume the worst of intentions for people. Someone does something, they cut me off in line. I just assume they're purposely doing it to make me mad. What a stupid idea. But it's true. It gets in our heads. Well, that person just did that. How dare them not think about me? Well, the problem is you're always thinking about you. They're not. They're thinking about them. They didn't even notice you there. They just pulled in front of you. They didn't even notice you. Don't assume ill intent always. Most of the time, they weren't thinking about you. Give them benefit of the doubt. It's not an insult to you most of the time. Let me end with a story. A friend of mine, he worked in the hospital system, and he said he's driving down the road, and this car just flies by him, and they're going way too fast. They get to the light, and they stop really quickly. My friend almost hits him. He's honking at them, and this person begins swerving all over. And so my friend, he's like, this idiot on the road. Like, how dare people like this? This wasn't even in California. This was Colorado, right? And so he pulls up next to them. He's like, F you, like, get off the road. He's so mad, and he's just like laying into them. And this person's swerving all over still, and he's like, oh, crap. And he kind of lets the guy get ahead of him again. My friend is heading to his job at the hospital. My friend pulls up, and he's pissed because he sees this guy pull into the hospital. And then he watches as the guy pulls right up to the emergency room parking. The guy, hits the brakes, puts a car in park, and my friend watches as this guy runs to the back, pulls out this little boy whose head is bleeding, and rushes inside. Right? My friend assumed the worst. Was ready to just lay into the guy. My friend wanted to have a fist fight with this dude. He was so mad. And yet, he was probably going through the most terrifying moment of his life. Son in the back, unconscious, bleeding. And how many times do we do that? Compassion, mercy, love is what's needed. And we're still functioning eye for an eye. A moment of empathy could go so far, and we're more interested in ourselves. I think this is why the teachings of Jesus resonate so well with me. Jesus says, think about the enemy as a person, another human being. The enemy is your friend. The enemy is your neighbor. That's why when Jesus says, love your neighbor, for them, the neighbor was, of course, just another Jewish guy. Jesus says, no, your neighbor is everybody. Your neighbor is your boss. Your neighbor is your ex-husband. Your neighbor is the guy driving terribly on the freeway. They're all your neighbor. And they're all humans just like you, doing their best. Why not show compassion? Why not let that be the kind of justice you choose to live? Thank you guys so much for allowing us to continue sharing these moments, these videos with you. As always, we are a community. We meet all over the place in different living rooms, and there are expenses. There's expenses for food. There's expenses for outings. There's expenses for outreach projects. There's expenses to create create this content. And so please go online right now if you could. We'd so greatly appreciate it. If you find value in these teachings, go to www.ethos-church.org/donate and give there, because again, it would mean a great deal to us to continue sharing these ideas to the world around us. And if you like this, please like the page and then send it to some friends. Share it with people. And also consider getting onto our website and grabbing our newsletter weekly. We send out a newsletter with all different concepts that will kind of function as a kind of study guide to help you through this coming week of how do I live this out now? What kind of concepts can help me become someone who focuses more on restorative justice rather than punitive? Join us there and you'll get lots of different announcements, different ideas. It's all there. Anyways, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Ethos Online, again, whether you're in the living room, whether you're driving, wherever you are or by yourself, you are invited to be, belong, and become the very best version of yourself. Guys, I love you so much. Can't wait to see you next week.